Stand the other side if that's okay. Thanks, Pete. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Pete. As Pete said, I'm Robert Winsley from Radioactive Waste Management in the UK. I'm here today talking to you as the outgoing secretary of the IGD-TP, the Implementing Geological Disposal technology platform. So this platform represents one of the three key groups of actors that make up the joint program community, so that's waste management organisations. What I want to talk about is a bit about the successes that the platform have had in the last 10 years, a little bit about how we see the platform changing as we move into our second decade and evolving to be complementary to joint programming, of course, and also then talk a little bit about how the platform will represent waste management organisation needs within joint programming when the EURAD programme is up and running, which has literally started in the last few days. I need to click it, don't I? Right, okay, so back in 2009, which is almost 10 years ago now, a group of waste management organisations, 11 waste management organisations, came together to establish and coordinate joint activities across Europe. And the aim was really to facilitate a stepwise incremental progression towards the realisation of geological disposal of higher activity wastes. The group have had a lot of objectives and aims over the last 10 years, but really the main one is to coordinate RD&D work to help ensure realisation of the platform's vision. The platform's vision, put quite simply, is that collectively we all want to have the first geological disposal facility for spent fuel, for high-level wastes, and for other long-lived intermediate-level wastes operating safely in Europe by the year 2025. So that's obviously not too far away now. And it's that vision that we've been working towards for the last 10 years. Okay, so the IGD-TP is led by representatives from 11 waste management organisations, but it also has a wider membership totalling something around 600 individual people. So collectively, we've all been committed and working towards building confidence in the safety of geological disposal amongst European citizens, but importantly amongst European decision makers. We want to encourage the establishment of waste management programs across Europe that integrate geological disposal as the preferred, internationally preferred solution for the waste management challenge that all of the European member states that have nuclear inventories face. And then, of course, as we heard yesterday, we want to facilitate access to expertise and bespoke facilities that are required to advance all of our programs. And as we discussed, geological disposal is a very long time span program, so we have quite a unique challenge in not just developing that expertise and facilities, but of course maintaining them over an incredibly long duration, perhaps 100 years plus. Okay, so one of the first major achievements of the platform, and one of the first tasks the group really worked on, was the development and the eventual publication in 2011 of the first strategic research agenda. And I won't go into great details of our SRA here. Hopefully people are familiar with it and have read it. If you're not, it's still available on our website, so please do have a look if you get the time. What the Strategic Research Agenda, or the SRA, does is it identifies the main RD&D issues that we believe as a group of implementers are required and would benefit from a coordinated effort to realise that vision 2025 to get the first geological disposal facility operating in Europe. So I think it's important to recognise that it was intentionally biased towards the needs of the more advanced programs to a certain extent, because it was really to achieve that vision that the SRA was focused. Still, of course, a huge benefit to the programs at an earlier stage of advancement, but that was the focus when the SRA was drafted almost 10 years ago now. It's been very successful, I would argue, in providing sort of a valuable input to identifying the areas that future Euratom framework calls have then focused in on. I won't explain it in great detail, but at a high level it comprises 7 key topic areas and various cross-cutting disciplines that are sort of illustrated by this blue schematic on the bottom of the slide. So you can see at the top left, that's our Vision 2025 to get a GDF up and running. From that, you can crystallize out some requirements, some key things that we need to do and that we can benefit from in doing as a group collectively together to achieve that vision. And then the 7 key topics can be loosely categorized into demonstration of long-term safety, which is all about the underpinning science and the post-closure safety case. Demonstration of disposal techniques and components, which is primarily about technology demonstration and also covers the operational safety case aspects. And then characterization and confirmation of sites, which is about identifying, characterizing and selecting a site. Cross-cutting activities cover things like knowledge management, which we spoke a lot about yesterday, and also things like competence, maintenance, education and training themes. SRA then prioritizes all of those aspects into the key topics based on importance and also urgency of achieving that vision. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what the cover of the SRA looks like. So we've been working to this for, I think, 8 or 9 years now, and I would argue it's been very successful in steering and aligning a lot of Euratom research and training spend in our domain. So I won't read out all the titles, but you can see on the left-hand side the topic areas that we've focused projects on. And on the right-hand side, I'm sure you can recognize some of the logos. Some of the projects were presented yesterday. In fact, some are a bit older than that. But over the last sort of 8 to 9 years, this is my rough sum, so Christoph, you may have slightly different numbers, but these are the projects that I think the IGD-TP has been instrumental in forming and steering and helping the delivery of. So we've delivered at least 17, by my count, projects that total something in the region of 100 million euros of spend focused on RD&D to help us realise that vision. So I think it's quite a significant achievement from all the people involved. Okay, so the group was initially established with financial support from the European Commission, which we're, of course, very grateful for. We're now, however, funded by the 11 waste management organisations or organisations responsible for implementation-related RD&D, and that group of 11 organisations forms our executive group. As I showed on the last slide, we've made a lot of progress over the last 10 years, and we're now sort of in a position where, as you will be familiar with from some of the presentations yesterday, our Finnish colleagues, Posiva, have a construction license and are actually constructing their facility as we speak, which is, of course, excellent news for all of us. I believe they're submitting their operational license application next year, and I think from Johan's presentation yesterday, it was suggested that they were hoping to be operational by 2024. So obviously that's excellent news. SKB submitted their construction license back in 2011, and I believe Ondra are expected to follow suit in the very near future. So at the moment, we really are moving really close to realising that vision. We have 3 programmes that realistically could be realising that vision in the coming years, which is great news for all of us. Unfortunately, as is always the way with these things, that isn't the end of the work to be done. So we've made a lot of significant steps towards realisation of our vision, but we would state as a platform that sustained RD&D is still absolutely vital to ensure that all countries, not just the most advanced programmes, at various stages of advancement, continue to progress towards implementation. So the IGD-TP recognised that we need to sort of evolve and reform a little bit as we move into our second decade, so we stay relevant and stay addressing the needs of our membership. We want to remain as a technically, of course, scientifically focused organisation. And we want to keep our focus primarily on deep geological disposal, as it always has been. But we do want to broaden our remit and our coverage to include more upstream activities, such as waste treatment and conditioning, where it has an impact on disposability, and also broaden out the coverage of waste streams that we address, so we actually make sure that we address wastes that are relevant to all of the mandated WMOs within the joint programming, not just our original membership. 120 plus member organisations at last count, and as I think I mentioned, 600 individuals. So the group has clearly wanted and have a large involved membership. From my observations in the group in the last few years, historically, our primary focus has really been on steering the RD&D needs for Euratom-funded projects. But right back at the beginning, we always had an intention of not just steering Euratom RD&D work, but also developing WMO, bilateral, trilateral, collaborative projects outside of Euratom funding. So moving forward, we want to increasingly focus on those two broad activity areas. The reason we want to evolve, the reason we need to evolve to stay relevant, of course, is because the environment around us changes. And one of the big changes in the last few years, as you'll all be aware, is this EC call for a step change in the way cooperative RD&D involving all parties is funded. So that's not just WMOs, that's all of the key actor groups that make up the joint programming community. So there's a call for a joint program, and obviously the EURAD proposal has been developed, has been evaluated, and started literally a few days ago, which is a huge achievement that I'm sure Marie will tell us a lot more about later today, so I won't steal any of her key messages. What I did want to say is IGD-TP are absolutely fully supportive of the EURAD program. However, we also want to stress that it's important to recognise that WMO research needs, WMO RD&D programs, are much broader scope than the joint program could, should, and will address. And what I've tried to do here is use this Venn diagram, which is taken from the JOPRAD project that I'm sure Jacques will recognise, as I think it quite nicely illustrates the areas of commonality that the EURAD strategic research agenda can address. That's the bit where the circles overlap. So the bit where all three actor groups agree that that topic's a priority, that will be happening hopefully within the joint programme and was included in the EURAD SRA. The areas where two of the three groups overlap would also be included in the EURAD SRA. But what this diagram shows is the vast areas of RD&D scope that won't be addressed by the joint programme. So from my perspective, I'm interested in the WMO circle, but our other colleagues in the presentations that follow will be interested in the other two circles. So this isn't to say that the EURAD SRA has missed these areas, because there's some really good reasons why we wouldn't include such scope within a joint programme. So for example, it might not be appropriate for a waste management organisation and for a regulatory TSO to collaborate in a certain area, perhaps due to a perceived conflict of interests. Or perhaps whilst a topic is of interest to WMOs, it may not be sort of deemed sufficiently cutting-edge science to interest our research entity colleagues. So there's a lot of good reasons why there'll be a lot of work we need to do outside of the European Joint Programme. And as we move forward, we want to continue consistently focus on both what's within the joint programme and the scope of work that we want to deliver outside of it as well. So yeah, that's just summarising that point. We want to do two key things in the next decade. Focus on WMO interests outside the joint programme scope, and of course, focus on appropriately steering those interests within the EURAD joint programme. So this slide's it's a bit kind of a busy slide, but it's trying to illustrate our sort of revised operating model. And I'll try and explain the key bits of it. So on the right-hand side, if you can see the bits in green, we have the executive group of the IGD-TP, the 11 representatives of WMOs. We also, of course, want to make sure we're taking on board the needs and the interests of WMOs that aren't in the IGD-TP, but are mandated within the joint programme, which is, I think, is another 9 or 10 WMOs. So we want to address everyone's interests, not just those of our original membership. So that group of 20-odd WMOs will work together on the right-hand side to develop joint activities that are of common interest to WMOs. Now, some of those activities could be consistent with joint programming ground rules, could be proposed for inclusion in future rounds of the joint programme, but that would require them to have support from the other colleges. Areas that aren't consistent with ground rules but are still of WMO interest can be done within the orange bar you see on the left-hand side there as WMO bilateral projects. Key point I wanted to make, and this is sort of broad illustrative numbers, they're not hard numbers, but broadly speaking, as WMOs, we think about 5 to 10% of our research needs could be addressed by the joint programme. We think perhaps another 10% or so could be addressed by WMO collaborative projects, that bar in orange, and probably 3/4 to 80% of an RD&D programme we believe should reside within the national programme. So they're just rough numbers, and that will, of course, change depending what stage of advancement an individual programme's at. Okay, a couple more slides and I will wrap up quickly. I mentioned about work outside of the joint programme. This is the governance structure for the EURAD joint programme. And the key bit I wanted to illustrate was the IGD-TP intend to deliver the WMO college function within joint programming. The General Assembly there is the sort of decision-making body of the joint programme, and I'm sure Marie will explain more about this later, so I'll skip over it quite quickly. And then we have the Bureau of the General Assembly, where the IGD-TP have elected 3 representatives to represent the interests of all WMOs in the sort of day-to-day workings of the joint programme. So to allow us to do this, we evolved, as I've mentioned briefly in the presentation, so we hopefully now address the needs of all the mandated WMOs, not just our original members. Okay, to conclude then my presentation, IGD-TP coordinates joint WMO RD&D interests, both within joint programming and outside of joint programming. We focus remains on geological disposal, but we want to broaden out our coverage to cover more higher activity wastes, more upstream activities, treatment and conditioning, and things like, for example, disposal of sealed sources. So some of our membership are not nuclear power generation countries. We want to aim to coordinate more relevant WMO research outside of joint programming and to continue to communicate our implementers' needs to society and our membership. So the last slide then, as a look ahead to the future, I would argue major progress has been made in the last 10 years towards achieving our vision. However, in order to meet the challenges of the next decade, the next phase we're moving into, we're undertaking the process of updating and revising that vision. So our new vision needs to consider the next steps towards industrialisation of geological disposal facilities within Europe. We want the focus to lie on safe operation of the first facilities and also the required optimisation and the development of individual solutions so we can tailor solutions to meet the different waste streams that we have across European member states. We intend to announce our finalised updated vision at our 10-year anniversary, which is in November this year. And then following that in 2020, we want to revise our strategic research agenda to reflect the new vision and the new scope of work that we see of importance. And I'd stress that that strategic research agenda will be complementary to the EURAD strategic research agenda. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you for listening.